Okay, Zach, I think we're going to kick off. We might be live somewhere, who knows?
Yeah,
But thank you everyone for sticking with us while we just worked through a couple of technical difficulties on the Zoom to YouTube to Facebook connection. Appreciate everyone tuning in. As some of you may know, many of you may know, my name's Troy Taylor. I'm the VP of Performance Innovation here at Tonal, and I am joined tonight with my co-host.
Zach Lebovics. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be chatting with Troy. Hopefully, people can hear us. I am a product manager on the product team at Tonal.
Nice. And tonight we are talking all about drop sets. We're going to go into the feature, what we've developed. I'm going to go a little hardcore on the science tonight. We'll go into a bit of understanding of muscle growth and what drives muscle growth, and how that works. We were a couple of minutes late, so we won't do too many icebreakers. But maybe just to kick us off, Zach can give us maybe ask a couple of questions around some of our drop sets adoption, and then we'll get started in with the actual thing in the next 60 seconds or so.
Yeah, and I'm not exactly sure where to track responses, so Troy helped me out here, but
I'm doing my best.
no worries. Maybe I'll throw it to the group. For context, we can't see who is live, how many people are live, where we're live. And so it could be that we're just talking to each other right now. But in the event that there are people listening, question one for the group is how many millions of pounds have been lifted using drop sets?
Millions of pounds lifted on drop set. So the feature launched what? How many weeks ago? Two?
January 8th.
Jan 8th. So nearly 3 weeks. I actually don't know the answer. How many million pounds? I'm going to say 40 million pounds, and I've done at least maybe 50,000 of them.
Double it and you're very close. 71 and a half
71.5 million pounds. Damn.
across how many drop sets, Troy?
Oh, in total, how many drop sets have been done? 71 million pounds. So if it was a million drop sets, that would be 71 pounds lifted. So it wouldn't be that. I'm going to say maybe like 75,000 sets, maybe.
Your weight answer, the total weight is about as close as total sets. We're at 225,000. I think
Oh,
you're
wow.
overestimating people's strength scores and
I think my math is
rep
just
maxes.
I think my math is just bad, and I was trying to back calculate on the fly. I should not do math live. It's not my strong point. So okay. With that said, we are gonna jump in. I'm gonna start, and then we'll hand off to Zach, and we'll go back and forth over the next sort of 45 minutes or so. I want to start. Like, I think everyone's aware of what drop sets are, but I was going to give a little framing of what they how they typically done in the gym and what people are used to, and then hand over to Zach to sort of talk a bit about the product development process before we go in specifically to tonal drop sets. So drop sets, time tested training technique, right? That many people may have done traditionally in the gym. I'd say this is most commonly done with dumbbells on a dumbbell rack. You run the rack, as it were, with something like bicep curls. So you start on a heavier side of it. It might be with something like 25 or 35-pound dumbbells. You're doing curls. You might be able to do, somewhere between 4 and 6 of those. You would put those down when you're close to failure. Then you would pick up the next dumbbell down. It might be 5 pounds lighter. And you go again, and again and again, and you repeat that kind of process. The the way that works is that it's getting you close to failure, right? You lifting that first dumbbell, it's getting fatigue in your system, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But like you'll get fatigue in the system, and then you do the manual process. You get a little bit of recovery. You've got whatever the next dumbbell is. There's a big drop, potentially 5 pounds, sometimes 10, sometimes 2.5, depends on what dumbbells are available, and you rinse and repeat that. And there's some reasonable evidence to suggest that this is a really time efficient way of training. And so what we've done with tonal drop sets, and we're going to talk all about today, is take all of that same basic principle and then apply it to the 21st century with technology. You would have noticed probably over the last couple of years, there's been many workouts that we've termed drop sets in some way. We've been trying to work around this kind of project, whether it's been mechanical drop sets, which are like where you do a harder exercise and then a potentially slightly easier one back to back. An example would be like dual lat pull down, and then you go into an alternating or a single arm, right? The dual is harder, bilateral exercise is harder than the single or the alternating. Also done with like a bench press into a push up or something like that. So we've done this and they've always been super popular. People love them as a training technique. And so we wanted to double down on that kind of process. So handing over to Zach, he's going to talk about how we double down on that process.
Yeah. Before we get there, I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about how we decide what we do work on, and how did drop sets hit the center stage. So, talking a little bit about the product process, the way that we build features here at Tonal, which is pretty typical at really any tech company, is we first convene as not only a product team, but as a leadership team, performance team with Troy and all the members on his team, design, user research. We come together and we define the product strategy. That's effectively what is our vision, what are we trying to do, and how do we get there? From this, we develop a product roadmap. This is effectively a list of features as well as what dates they will land. Think about a Gantt chart or a timeline view. And this blueprint or roadmap is what we commit to. This is what we build. And we revisit our plans every few months. How do projects get on this list? I know that people are probably very curious about this. Um, there are a few vectors that are really important to us as a business. The first and most important vector is member value. How much do they benefit the members and membership? There are certain features that we would love to work on that might only be beneficial for a very small percentage. And then there are others where we're solving a very big pain point for the vast majority. The latter is something that'll be really interesting to us in that domain. The second piece is alignment with our strategy. I mentioned that we come together, we come up with the vision of where we want to go. This is a lot of data feeds into this around what our business goals are, what are the specific metrics that we want to hit, what's the long-term vision. And so we want to make sure that the projects that we're working on align with the long-term vision. And then, of course, there's cost. There's the capital cost. Sometimes, in order to spin up a feature, we need new technology to power that. That goes into the cost bucket. There's also the amount of time spent on building this feature, which we can translate into a cost. And so, using those parameters, we take a look at all of the features that we'd like to develop, and we do a down selection process. Probably my least favorite part, because in doing the down selection, we're saying see you later to at least what 90%, 95% of the ideas that we're really excited about. And we commit fully to the 5 to 10% that we are that we have on our roadmap. And so drop sets was one, as Troy mentioned, we've been playing around with this, trying to recreate it in different vehicles, different content. As he mentioned, we've done mechanical drop sets. We have also used burnout, which I will touch on later, as a pseudo drop set. But we've known for a long time that when injecting this concept into content, we see high adoption. We see questions about, hey, when is this feature coming to life? And we saw a real opportunity here. The opportunity existed beyond just content. We know that about half of our members have muscle growth as at least one of their goals on Tonal, and 40% of our members have it as the primary goal. So we saw not only a desire and a good fit on the feature front for this feature, but we know that drop sets is going to be really effective at allowing you to grow muscle more efficiently. So that's number one. Number two is, and I kind of hit on this, performance outcomes. There's really strong literature, which I myself am not equipped to speak to, which is why we have Troy here, for many other reasons as well. But Troy's going to hit on some of the recent literature. We're going to dive into the science. We're going to get nerdy, so buckle up. But those are mainly the reasons why drop set made the cut. And then in terms of how the sausage gets made, I want to speak about that a little bit. So we decided that okay, drop sets is the feature that we want to work on alongside a few other features. How do we get started? What do we do? Well, we take a look at all that we've done, um, collect as much data as we can. Data being, we talk to our members, we understand how they've done drop sets in the past, how they'd like to do drop sets going forward. We take a look at our data and understand when people are using drop sets, how they're using drop sets. And so we factor all of that into the ideation process. And then we come together again as a team, we converge, we ideate, we strip it down to, okay, here's the experience that we think is going to work best. And before we launch, we internally, we dog food it, which just means we eat our own dog food. We try the feature before launching it. And typically we also like to expand that to a beta group where we get people trying the feature before it goes live to our global members. And so with drop sets specifically, we're not quite done, and we'll talk about that as well. There's still some work to do, but the drop set, as you know today, I can tell you that the first version did not feel like that. We were luckily we had a lot of people to test and to give us feedback. I think our first go, Troy and I looked at each other and we're just like, is this feature going to work? Because people came back and they're like, hey, I didn't experience a single drop. I'm hitting 60 reps. Is this how it's supposed to be? And so lots of refinement to get it out the door. But the state that we're at now, I'm happy to say, again, we still definitely need some work, but the vast majority that are doing drop sets, we ask a little question after the workout to gauge sentiment on drop sets specifically. We're getting really positive reception there. So we know that we're onto something, but we're still motivated to continue iterating and evolving the experience.
Sweet, thank you. Yes, and I think I did those first 60. I think my first set was like a 90 reps. It was awful in every kind of way. Just for Zach can see, I see us live on Facebook, YouTube, and get comments in. And Leah, I see you like it when we get nerdy. We're gonna get really nerdy now. These words have probably never been said on a Facebook Live or YouTube kind of things before. We're going to talk about Henneman's size principle, that well-known Harvard physiologist from 1957 that you're all excited to hear about. We're going to talk about force velocity curves, and we're going to talk about mechanical tension and essentially how all of those play together to really sort of drive a lot of this signaling that we get from muscle growth. Because I think if you want to understand why they work or why they're potentially an effective training tool, then I think it's important to at least have a rough understanding of what's going on mechanically. Because I've seen questions in the OTC, what about time under tension and other pieces? So we're going to talk around that in the context of what's going on physiologically so we can really try to understand. Okay, so let's start with that Henneman size principle. Henneman size principle is the principle that you recruit motor units, so essentially the things that control your muscle fibers contract, from smallest to largest based on effort. So when you are walking or doing a body weight squat when you're relatively strong, you only innervate, you only send an action potential from your brain, an electrical signal, to the motor units that are relatively low threshold. So they're relatively small motor units. They're mostly made up of slow twitch fibers, and they don't innervate a lot of fibers because your body's evolutionary doesn't need you to do it. As you increase effort, Henneman's size principle says you recruit more and more motor recruitment, more and more motor neurons in sequence to match the demand of the effort that you're being given. So when you're doing maximal effort or 1 RM, you innervate all of your muscle fibers, all of those motor units, in order to lift the weight that you're trying to lift, or at least attempt to if it's super maximal. And so there's this sort of thing from smallest to largest. The large 10% of those motor units, account for more than all of the rest of the motor units combined. They're the ones that most fast twitch muscle fibers grow the most from a muscle hypertrophy perspective, and are the ones that drive the majority of the hypertrophy. So we want to be able to innovate and to activate these very high motor threshold units. And there's two ways we can do that. We can lift a 1RM or close, and generally above about 80% of your 1RM, you start recruiting almost all of your motor units. So around 80%, which correlates, so you understand, with about an 8-rep max. Hence why we might choose an 8-rep max on something like drop sets, where you're getting close to maximal recruitment of motor units from the very, very first rep. You can do that from from a heavyweight perspective. You can also do it by doing a lighter weight and doing many, many repetitions, right? When you get into the last 3, 5, 1 rep before failure, even with a lightweight, you're using maximal effort. So you recruited, when you did, rep 1 of 30, relatively small motor units. By rep 27, you're innovating all of the bigger ones too. And so that's the two ways that we can use Henneman's size principle to essentially kind of, understand what is being recruited. Because in order for a muscle fiber to grow, it has to be activated for the most part. There is some stretch-mediated passive tension that we're not going to go into today, but we could geek out another time on. But for the most part, you have to activate a muscle fiber in order for it to grow. That's Henneman's size principles. We want to activate these big, large muscle fibers by lifting heavy or going close to failure. Second is the force-velocity relationship, which basically says when you're moving fast, your muscles actually produce, each fiber produces a relatively low amount of force, right? It's tough to apply high force quickly. It's about applying, essentially, you can produce more force at lower speeds and then you can at faster speeds. So we want these high motor threshold unit recruitments, but we also want to produce high amounts of force. You might be asking, when we get into the drop sets, we talk about using maximal concentric speed. It's the idea that would mean at the first, they're not producing a high amount of force immediately. But what you see is, because you're activating relatively quickly, what you see is as you fatigue and you unintentionally slow, each of those fibers is producing more force. You're getting high recruitment with high force production because you're getting an unintentional slowing of the muscle fiber. So that means you're generating a lot of force. If you intentionally go slow with a weight that's, a weight you could lift 20 times, but on rep 10, you decide to go very slow, each of the muscle fibers that is recruited will be producing a high amount of force because it's a slow action, but you won't be recruiting, back to Henneman's size principle, that many muscle fibers. So you want a lot of fibers recruited and them to be under high force. Which brings us to third, which is mechanical tension, which is essentially the pulling force of your muscle fibers that are activated. That's the signal that essentially stimulates muscle growth, mechanotransducers that send signals back to the brain, but they initiate the anabolic cascade of protein synthesis if you have enough fuel and enough recovery and you give it enough stimulus. But essentially, if you get this high motor threshold unit with this high force through low speed at ropes close to failure, you're producing large amounts of mechanical tension on the fibers that can grow the most, and that's what stimulates muscle growth. That's probably, like, I don't have a PhD, but I started, never finished, got offered a job and quit the PhD. That's probably like year 2 of my PhD right there, in terms of understanding some of the mechanical tension and on what's happening within the fibers. So you take that these fibers are under this high mechanical tension in this fatigue state, and drop sets work both traditionally and with tonal by essentially maximizing the number of reps that are in this high motor unit recruitment with high levels of mechanical tension and high force. So you get to 2 reps from failure, which is a reasonable amount of evidence to suggest that reps to failure are maybe slightly more stimulating. If you did a straight set and went to failure, maybe it's slightly more stimulating than 2 reps from failure, but it's really, really fatiguing. And so what generally is considered is about reps 3, 4 to 2, 4 reps from failure to around 1 to 2 reps from failure are the ones that are a good balance between stimulus, high amount of hypertrophy stimulus, and somewhat lower fatigue. And so what drop sets do in tonal and in the gym is essentially try and maximize the number of one of them in any given period of time. So if you're doing one set of 10 straight sets, reps, let's say 7, 8, 9, and 10, those 4 reps are contribute the most to stimulus to hypertrophy. But if you're doing a drop set, you have reps, 7, 8, 9, and 10 that are all stimulating, but also 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, as long as you want to go. All of those also have large amounts of hypertrophy. They're probably not equal amounts of hypertrophy. They probably diminish because every time you kind of add additional reps, you do add additional fatigue. Calcium ions in the sarcoplasmic reticulum get absorbed. Your actual force production is lower. So it's not like they're equally hypertrophy or muscle growth is stimulating, but they are still very stimulating, just maybe diminished slightly. And if you think like about stacked bar chart is the way that I think about it, it's like, okay, well, I could do a straight set and kind of things, and I get this much stimulus. And then I get these little additional stacks onto my bar chart of my hypertrophy stimulus. So I don't know how long that was, but that's essentially like, what's going on from a muscle growth and kind of stimulus standpoint, and what sort of drop sets are trying to do from a sort of maximizing, this close proximity to failure. I will
Am I
say
the only
before,
one? I was going to ask, am I the only one dying to do curls after that in-depth explanation?
you're the only person that's still listening after that in-depth. Everyone's like, damn, I did not realize I was getting melatonin while I was listening
Hey,
to this
science has never been this fun.
tonal talk. So before I hand back to Zach to go in, I will add, like, generally, and we'll talk about this more, like, these are a really time efficient way of training, right? These are not, I'm going to do 5 drop sets in a row on the same exercise. They are fatiguing. It's kind of the idea that you either do it as a time efficient training session, you come in, you do your calibration set, and Zach can talk exactly around what that means. You do your drop set and you get out, and you can get a decent stimulus in a very short period of time. Or you can use it as a finisher. You've done 2 or 3 regular sets and you want to push hard on that last one. Or sometimes as a pre-fatiguer, you can come in and pre-fatigue. Maybe you're bench pressing and your triceps are normally a bit dominant. You could pre-fatigue them with a drop set, a tricep drop set before going on. But it's not something that I'm going to recommend. Hey, go and do 6 sets of drop set deadlifts in a row with 2-minute recoveries, because that would be extremely tiring. So I will stop there and hand back to Zach to give you a talk on tonal drop sets specifically and what's going on.
Awesome. Don't know how to follow that up, but let's talk a little bit about the technology powering drop sets. I know that there is a lot of interest in this, a lot of questions about this, so feel free to pepper both of us and me specifically with questions that you've got in the chat. So Troy mentioned that these drop sets, they function a little bit differently, and the reason for that is we had the opportunity to reimagine how drop sets are done. The example that Troy used up at the top of running the rack is the traditional way of thinking about drop sets, also called strip sets, where you do a set of, let's call it like 4 to 6 until you hit this mental block or mental fatigue, and then you lower the weight and you continue going through that process. And one thing that we were discussing is that's reliant on a person knowing, thinking about when they're reaching failure. And part of the value prop about tonal is we should be smart enough to sense when you're at failure. And so our drop set technology is built on rep speed, or what we call velocity. And so at a high level, what we're doing throughout a drop set is tonal is sensing when you're close to failure on a rep by rep basis. And it does this, as I mentioned, by measuring the speed of each concentric portion, which is key. It's the concentric portion of the rep. For bicep curl, which I see that I'm the only one that's motivated or inspired to do that after Troy's little blurb. For bicep curl, that's on your way up. For lat pull down, that's on your way down. And the speed is really important, because this determines when and how drops happen. So Troy, correct me if I'm wrong here, but people tend to, at your 8 rep max, you probably hit your peak speed at what, like rep 4, rep 5, somewhere in that range.
I think if you're driving, it'll be earlier, like probably rep 2 to rep 4.
Okay,
If you're skilled, it's a skilled technique to drive quickly. So
right.
yeah, rep 2 to rep 4 would be sort of typical for people. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. So it can happen rep 2 to rep 4. It can happen later. The on tonal, we're sensing throughout the entire set. And what Troy hit on or alluded to a little bit is this set is a little different from most in the sense that it's not that speed is the name of the game, but moving quick with intent is very much important here because the velocity dictates the drops. And so your peak velocity is going to be the fastest rep that you hit on the concentric portion. Now, when do drops happen? Drops happen when you are at least 20% below that peak and your rep speed is slower than your last one. And if you think about what that means, that tells Tonal that, okay, as you're continuing through your set, you've now slowed down to a point that the weight that you were previously lifting is potentially too heavy to keep up with the speed that you set at the outset of the set. And then what we do is we strip the weight. In this case, we would strip the weight on your way back down, and you can keep on pushing, keep on going. And your whole goal is really to keep your velocity relatively steady, and Tonal is there to support you by reducing the weight. We talked about in most cases in the real world, when people are doing strip sets, drop sets, you mentally tap out. There is the faked in functionality in drop sets, and I would tap yourself on the back if you've hit this, where at the end of the set, we actually disable the weight, we turn off the weight if your velocity is slow enough. That tells us that the struggle is real. You hit the end of the set, and you're now ready to progress to your next set. I will also flag that I've seen some comments about the weight turning off too early for some. We're currently digging into that, making sure that we're not kicking that in too early. But the intent of that feature is instead of you thinking about at rep 20, am I done this set? Tonal will tell you you're done. And so if you see, if any of you have watched Troy struggle through his drop sets, you can see the wince on his face, the grimace as he's pushing through those last few reps. And that's what it should feel like. That's what it should look like is a really slow rep. And I mean, Tony Gordon tells you not to scrunch your face, but really, you know, you're working hard if you are scrunching your face.
It comes naturally to me. There's no stopping
Yeah,
that, despite what Tony says. Yeah,
it's hard not to, right? Let me hit on a few more points and then we can talk about the calibration set as well. Let's talk about the weight for a little bit. So, um, Troy mentioned this as well. We start you off at your 8 rep max. And what that means is it's the weight that you would use for an 8 rep set or a set that you would do 8 reps for. And the reason we chose that, I mentioned we did a lot of testing before we launched the feature. We tried different weights here, and this was the weight that allowed you to experience drops at the right time or most optimal time, as well as land you in the sweet spot of Troy. What is it like around 15 to 30 reps? I know there's a lot of variance in what there's no such thing as a perfect drop set, but if you're within that range, you're feeling it, you're feeling the pump, you know you've done a good job.
Yeah, 16 to 24-ish rep is the sweet spot. If you go up to 30, I think you're fine. And that's based off the two things. Like both it works at that. But number one, we're getting that 8 reps. So we're getting that high motor threshold recruitment from the very first rep. And the research evidence that says like once you start going beyond sort of 30-ish reps from a rep things, you get a lower level of contribution of hypertrophy. And so we're kind of trying to keep it under 30 wherever possible. But 16 to 24 is like that sweet spot. Sometimes I go a little heavy and it's like 12 and I'm like, I'm done. And I've had 3 drops and it's a great set and it's only 12 reps. That's totally fine. Sometimes it could be 26 to 28, but generally 16 to 24 is the sweet spot.
Thanks, Troy. Yeah, and again, we tested higher RM and lower RM, which just means a heavier starting weight and a lighter starting weight. When you're going heavier, it's really hard to reach that peak speed that is now your baseline or your threshold for what determines next rep drops. And then if the weight is too low, you basically can keep repping out and your velocity doesn't really slow down. That's what we initially had, where we had a bunch of people hitting 30, 40, 50 reps with almost ease, which will bring me to calibration sets in just one moment. But yeah, the last point that I wanted to hit on is I guess let's segue now. When we were testing, we were looking at the sweet spot, how many people landed within, let's call it the 16 to 24 range. More often than not, we saw people overshoot it. And so Troy and I, we dug in and we tried to better understand what's going on here, why aren't drops happening? And one thing became pretty clear to us. And that was that e even though Tonal remembers your weights, it recommends your weights. We use a bunch of different data points to determine that. Some people were either not used to pushing themselves to their true 8 rep max, or they made conscious decision not to go super, super heavy. And so, understanding this, we went back to the drawing board and we thought about different ways to make the drop set more effective. And the drop set is most effective when you jump in and your 8 rep weight is truly your 8 rep max. And so what that would mean is you end your 8 rep set with, is it 2 reps in reserve? Right around
Yeah,
there?
it's probably your 8 rep set is your 10 rep max. So there's 2 reps from failure when you get to your
Yeah.
eight
Okay.
reps. That's what, yeah. But
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
works best. Like, it might be 6, it could be 12, but you want to be pretty close to that.
Okay, yeah. So the point here is you should be very close to tapping out near the end of your 8th rep. And so we went back to the drawing board. We thought up different ways to make it such that more people started at their most optimal weight. And we came up with this concept of a calibration set. And so what this is you are targeting 8 reps, but we encourage you to go beyond that if you can go beyond that. The other way still applies in this case, where if you have been lifting for a long time on tonal and you are at just like absolute max weight and 8 reps, you have to ditch your form in order to squeeze them all out. We actually encourage you go a little lighter here because again, if you're too heavy, you can't get that inertia that's needed or the initial speed in order to have a successful drop set. And so this calibration set really exists to help you fine tune your weight in the workout to where you are today. And today is very specific because that calibration set will apply for the drop set going in, but going forward, it won't affect your weights on other workouts. And so,
I just add that I mentioned this in one of my posts, but like the research evidence, I say it's plus or minus 10% day-to-day variation in strength. It's actually plus minus 18% is some of the research says up to. So your strength, depending on how you slept, how you ate, were you stressed at work? Did you do a workout yesterday, the day before, or the day before? Did you do a heavy leg session and you're still a bit of all of those things play into our strength on a day-to-day basis. And so what the calibration allows us is to do is fine tune your weight for today, and really dial it in for in that kind of perspective. So yes, there's this kind of element of, yeah, I'm not used to pushing myself hard, potentially, or I'm used to pushing myself way too hard. But things there's this is just daily variation that's important to account for so we get the most out of it.
yeah, yeah. And speaking anecdotally, this is just my own experience. When I hit a drop set, there are some moves, depending on how I'm feeling, depending on how easy it is to lift at the current weight that I'm at. I drop the weight a little bit, and I'm comfortable with doing so. It's really about starting at a point that you feel good but challenged at that 8 to 10 rep range. And that is probably the number one hack if people aren't fine tuning their starting weight, to do so because the weight plays a big role in how quickly you can move through your reps. I will also say that there's day-to-day variances for I mentioned. There's also recognition that, hey, maybe I've been training a certain way and I think that I've been lifting at my max, and we're now teaching you that you've got more gas in the tank and you can step on it if you want. It doesn't mean you have to, but if you are blowing over the 8 rep goal during your calibration set, definitely encourage you to at least consider doing that in other workouts, in your custom workouts, to make sure that your weight is a little more calibrated to what your true maximum is.
And vice versa. If you're one of the people with a 1500 plus strength score, but your form's pretty average and you're jerking a whole bunch of it, and you kind of start, this is not the time to try and hit a PR and kind of things. I think you'd get a much more successful and much more stimulating set if you did 6 reps rather than 8 on that, and it calibrated the weight down a little bit. Because maintaining good form and technique is absolutely essential to this. So yeah, it really exists to kind of dial it.
Yeah, and Rachel, to address your question, drop sets won't affect starting weights for future sets. And so if you do bring it down, sure, you're giving me a look. If you do bring it down,
Drop sets do not, calibration sets do.
the calibration sets do. I think I misspoke on the previous one. Drop sets do not. So if you jump into a drop set and you bump it down from 50 to 45 because you're just not feeling it that day, when you hit 8 reps in your subsequent sets, subsequent workouts, I should say, you will be put back to that 50 pound level.
Yeah. So we talked a lot around the sort of some of the velocity and the speed, and like that's really based off another term that you don't hear too much. You think velocity based training logic, but there's basically this almost close to linear relationship between proximity to failure and the velocity of the movement if I am trying to move maximally fast with maximal intent. Moving with maximal intent doesn't actually mean I'm moving quickly. It means I'm trying to move quickly. But there's this sort of very linear relationship. So when I'm 10 reps from failure, I'm at 1 speed, 9 reps, it drops almost linear, 8 reps linear, 7, 6, 5, 4, until I'm essentially the slowest speed I could do, which would be my 1 RM speed. And so that's sort of the underpinning of the technique that is required. So there's 3 key coaching tips that do, and Joe talks a lot about this in our intro to drop sets workout. So if you haven't done that, I encourage you to do it. But I dropped the video in Facebook community today because it's hard to remember it. One, it's not in the moment, but the most important kind of aspect is a controlled eccentric, so a 2 count or a steady control. It doesn't need to be exaggeratedly super slow, but you want to control the resistance because that is also stimulating. And then an explosive as fast as possible concentric. I do my calibration sets and my drop sets with that technique. So you're dialing in that technique, you're using its practice for that kind of process. So, it goes down, it's controlled, it explodes up. I example on bench press a lot. But it doesn't have to be on bench press, it could be on any others. I would say barbell chin-ups are some of my favorite drop sets. So sort of the opposite way of pulling fast, slowly controlling the way up, pulling fast on the way down. Tip number 1, you have to do that every single rep. Number 2 would be you shouldn't be pausing a ton in the stretch or in the sort of relaxed position. So on the barbell chin up, I don't want to be waiting for 1 or 2 seconds up here, getting a ton of recovery, because essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat velocity. I'm going to be kind of jerking, getting micro recoveries and jerking it down. I want to feel that stretch nice and controlled. As soon as I feel that stretch in the lats, contract again and drive, and slowly up and contract again and drive, and slowly up, and the same kind of process. Eventually, it will be relatively slow, but that's kind of the thing. So you don't pause. So fast concentric, controlled eccentric. Don't pause between reps. And then to sort of Zach's earlier point is, once you start, in the words of Akeem, don't stop until you feel either tonal switches the weight off or you feel you can't complete another rep with good form. If you're going to break down form, but there's many ways you can cheat velocity unintentionally most of the time. The most common one is in curls, and you start bringing your elbow forward rather than curling it with the bicep. You can suddenly go in this elbow sort of front raise. That happens a ton. You want to keep those elbows tucked in nice and contract, and feel the muscle, the fiber that you want to grow needs to be contracted. And so you want to don't stop until tonal switches the way off, or you feel your form is not able to complete another good rep. I think those are the absolute most important ones. Zach.
I know that Trapper has a question, and it has to do with your velocity throughout the set. Should it theoretically be slowing down, is the way that I interpret it.
it does theoretically slow down. Like, so yeah, so essentially, like, you know, what we're playing around, that 2 reps in reserve correlates most often with around a 20% velocity drop. And then your next one is a little bit slower, and then you get a little faster one and a little slower one, and a little faster, but the curve is downward and to the right. Like, you know, the failure rep is probably at, you know, 30 to 40 to 50 to 60% total velocity drop. You're kind of slowing down. When you get the little drop in weight, you get a faster rep, right? We basically take you 1 to 2 reps from failure, bring you back to 3 to 4 reps from failure, take you to 1 to 2, bring you back to 3 to 4. And we basically like ride that wave of failure, I think is the way I've described it. But the last reps are extremely slow.
Yeah. And I mentioned that we did a lot of testing before we packaged this to bring to all of our members. One of the things that we were testing very early on was the degree of the drop. And when we talk about velocity and speed and wanting to see it in that long, I guess, decrease or gradual decline, one thing that we did that we toyed around with was, hey, what if we stripped a little bit more weight off? And what we saw, Troy, was the velocity would just shoot up, and then to get back to that same range would take too long.
Yeah, essentially that's more what you're getting in a traditional gym, right? When you drop down 5 or 10
Yep.
pounds, you get close to failure. Okay, I'm right there. Then you get this little recovery, and then you drop, and now I'm 6 reps from failure again. And those are in a very, this is time efficient training. This is the primary benefit of something like Drop Flex, to use strategically, but particularly for time efficiency. You know, in some research, you know, a third to a half of the amount of time you can get very similar amount of muscle growth, traditional training. So you don't want wasted reps. You don't want to have to do those reps where they're just kind of getting you back to fatigue and to closer to failure. Just another question from Trapper in terms of partial reps. There is some evidence at the end, particularly for calf raises, of doing some partials. I would not combine drop sets and partials personally. I think that would be hugely fatiguing. I'm not saying it's not stimulating. It might have an additional stimulating benefit. But I typically, if I'm going to do a long muscle length partial rep, either at the end of my session or something, like, I'm probably not doing it on a drop set. The combination of drop set and lengthen would probably be fatiguing. I'm not saying you can't, but pretty stimulating, or pretty fatiguing as well as pretty stimulating. And then just one other question from Ryan, I think, that was submitted was, what's the expert advice on the ideal number of drop sets per lift? My opinion on this is per lift, as in per exercise. For the most part, I'm doing 1 drop set. I'm making it evident. You've seen my face on the Facebook video. I don't have much left after that. That is all I have for that session. So I'm using it for a time efficiency kind of point of view. I might go on and do, like, you know, in 30 minutes to failure, which I've also done as a before it was released as a tester. I'll do multiple drop sets within a workout, but not necessarily for the same exercise and back to back. If you do really want to do drop sets back to back, I personally wouldn't do them. But if you really want to do that, I would take long recoveries between them, 3 to 5-ish minutes. I think you do need that long to recover. And I would stick to isolation exercise, bicep curls, tricep extensions. Those are probably the only 2, maybe some shoulder lateral raises if you have a sadistic level of pain that you want to go to, or muscle burn. But I'd stick to those smaller muscle groups. I wouldn't be doing, you know, back-to-back bench pressing or back-to-back sort of RDLs or something like that, personally.
Troy, there's one feature that I forgot to hit on of drop sets that I'm sure is top of mind for most people, which is there is a point in the drop set where the weight stops dropping. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, why that is the case. Do you want to start with what we learned during the testing, why we introduced the plateau?
Yeah, so, you know, we started off, you're refining it, getting you know, closer and closer, this 8 rep, what's the right amount to drop to work for the most number of people, like what's the coaching technique, and we're finding all that was great. But then we found this point where even with everything, I would get to, say, rep 20, and I'm really close to failure and everything's working perfectly, and then the weight would drop again, and at some point it would get to the point of being, the weight is dropping faster than I'm fatigued. And I'm now at a point where it's light enough that I can just continue forever, which is far from failure and not what we want for time efficient training. hence what Zach can tell you what we introduced.
Yeah, so we introduced the weight plateau, which is the where you level off. We hold the weight constant until you do truly fatigue. When that hits, stick with me. This is a little hairy, but we want you to hit 4 reps. And I'm not saying that 4 reps is the perfect drop set, but this is the target that initiates the weight plateau. You hit 4 reps,
Four
sorry,
drops.
4 drops and 20 reps, whichever one comes second, right? And so 2 cases there. Let's talk about you hit the drops early. So maybe you hit you're on your fifth drop on rep 18, then you keep going to rep 20. You've successfully now done 20 reps. You've had at least 4 drops. We hold the weight constant. If you hit rep 20 and you've only had 1 drop, that tells us that you can keep going at your current weight and you can also benefit from the weight continuing to drop. And so we wait until your fourth drop. That could be at rep 25, that could be at rep 30. That being said, if you're pushing it that far and only experiencing 1 drop or no drops, then very likely weight isn't heavy enough, I would say.
Yeah, I think if you're getting more than rep 12 or 15 at the very most, and you're not experiencing your first drop, means the weight is likely too light. And then if you're still continuing, maybe you had the drop and kind of things, it dropped to 8, but then it didn't drop again. Probably implies that we work on that concentric speed. It means probably the weight dropped inappropriately early, because it's sensed that you were fatigued when you were probably weren't. I've seen a couple of comments in the community and other things of like, hey, I haven't experienced any drops. There's a couple of things that might be at play. Number one is, are you truly at an 8 to 10 rep kind of weight? Is it heavy enough? Because if you're doing 12, 15, 18 reps and not experiencing any drops, it means that you're at more than a 10 rep max, right? So we can kind of redo to that calibration set. It could also mean is like, I'm not getting any drops and then I fail. I think I saw a comment. It was like, I was on rep 4 and then it failed. And then I failed. That probably means it's the opposite. It's too heavy. If you can't get like 4 good reps out, then you're probably heavier than an 8 RM weight. And if you start heavy, then your velocity is never very fast. And therefore getting a 20% drop is going to be like, is close to failure directly. So you probably, starting on the opposite end. So if you're not getting, I'd say 4 reps is probably on the low end of a great things. If you're not getting 4 reps before failure, it's too heavy. And if you're getting definitely more than 15, then I think you're too light to do that. And so that would go back to the calibration set and refine that over time. Yes,
Or
I think barbell drop sets on deadlifts, Arlene. I think you want to have super solid technique. If you want to make sure that your technique is awesome on drop sets, particularly on something like a barbell deadlift, which it can actually be a really, again, I say funny in quotation marks. Can be a great drop set, but definitely need to make sure that you have a good technique. If you're concerned about that, it's easy to switch out on tonal in guided content. Just do a movement replacement. You can do the drop set for a different move and a replacement move that you feel more comfortable in. Obviously, in your own custom workouts, you can write kind of things, but I would just use that movement replacement for anything move that you don't feel like super comfortable in doing so. Okay, I think we're done. Is there any additional questions, things that have come up
maybe
right
Troy can hit
now?
on one more thing before we transition. Want to give people a little taste of what's to come. So we talked about a lot during this tonal talk, and we spent maybe half the time talking about how the feature works and nuances of the feature. We realize that this is a very nuanced, specific feature. There are a lot of nooks and crannies that aren't necessarily the easiest to understand at the outset, but once you get a feel for it, then things begin to make sense. Our number one focus right now is on feature education. And what I mean by that is not simply popping up modals and sending you emails about how drop sets work. We're integrating all of what we're talking about into the workout experience so that in situ, in the workout, while you're doing a drop set, it'll be much clearer when drops happen, you'll have a signal of the mark that you need to hit in order to prevent a drop. So that is coming sometime soon. And that's going to be a game changer when it comes to comprehension of the feature, and will likely allow people to jump right in and get a understanding of how the feature works without all the verbiage around it, just looking at visuals. And so when I say visuals, I'm looking at the chart. We've got a lot of exciting changes coming there. The other thing is feature fine tuning. We talked about weight calibration. We have people on either end of the spectrum. Some people, the weight is a little too high. Most people, the weight of their starting drop set is a little too low. We're thinking through with the calibration set, what more can be done there? Are there other potential things that will help the member really fine tune their weight and make sure that they're at the right weight? Drops, we're keeping a very close eye on that. We're seeing that drops happen at a different rate for different moves. We're tracking how often each move lands in this sweet spot, both in terms of drops and number of reps. If it's outside of that, we're investigating what needs to be done. And then the I mentioned this weight turning off. We want this to kick in at the right time, at the right moment. We're seeing some reports of weight turning off too soon. And so we're digging into when that happens. Again, we're noticing that it's more prevalent for certain moves than other moves. And so lots of work to be done to clean up, to optimize, but be excited about the future of drop sets as we have some changes coming.
Yeah. Awesome. And then a couple of additional questions or points that I've known come up in the community. So the calibration set, it will in guided content, so in coach-led content, there will always be a set that precedes the set that is the calibration set. It's mostly an 8-rep set, but actually in 30 minutes to failure in the program, it actually increases from week 2, week 3, I think week 4. But treat that as the calibration set. So go more than the reps or less than the reps. You want to go to 2 reps from failure in that set. That's always the way things. When we program for Tonal, it will always precede a set before the drop set. Will always exist, at least until we change the feature. But for the foreseeable future, we'll have this calibration set. If you're doing a custom or a free lifting workout and you want to do that calibration set, just select a normal 8-rep set, and that will activate and update the weight automatically. Yes, in custom, you can't add a drop set like you can for, like, say, a burnout set or a spotter. It is a set type. So it's like a reps duration or a drop set, which we only currently allow at a block or a set level, or a block level. You can't do it on a set-by-set basis. But certainly we hear the desire to be able to add it to a single set within that. It's just not functionality within the system right now. Zach, I don't know if you want to add any commentary to that.
Yeah, I think you hit it. It's something that we're looking into. We, on a global level, we're looking into giving our members more control over their experience, more flexibility in their workout planning and workout in the moment. And this is one of those features that is bundled within that larger body of work.
Cool. I think if I've kept up with comments as we've been going around, I think that is it. I don't have anything else. Zach, do you have anything more?
I'm just looking through the questions that were added. I I think we're all good. Oh, you know what? One thing that I promised we'd hit on that I didn't is burnout versus spotter. So let me hit on that very quickly. So burnout in the past, uh, we admittedly we have used that to try to mimic drop sets, but it's taking liberties with the feature a little bit. The two features
It's a
do.
common thing for me. I try to find where, like, I can
Yeah.
push the
That's
boundaries.
likely. Yeah, Troy's like, how do we get drop sets in there? And we're just like, this is what we got. Can you make anything of it? No, burnout is designed. It's an assistance mode. So burnout is designed to help you get to your rep target. It's designed to help you complete your set in either the prescribed duration or prescribed reps. Drop sets, on the other hand, is the target. Your target is to go to failure. And again, we're giving you ranges because there's no perfect number. There's no one number that you need to hit in terms of reps. You know, you hit it based on how you feel. And in that sense, they're two very different things. Again, burnout is a mode that is meant to assist you, like spotter is meant to assist you, whereas drop sets is that's the goal of the set. And so that also helps explain why there is that slight limitation within building custom workouts, integrating drop sets into the experience. It's right now you define it on a set level, and within a block, we don't have the capabilities today to be able to say, hey, I want to do 8 bicep curls, then I want to do 30 seconds worth of bicep curls. And this is the same thing. It would be, I want to do 8 bicep curls, and then I want to do a drop set. And so we're thinking through that again from top to bottom, and know that we take autonomy and control of the experience seriously. But these are two fundamentally different features, burnout and drop sets.
Awesome. Right. I think we have not bored, but
Overstayed our welcome.
yeah, probably. Yeah, they were like, leave to the right, exit right now.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
we appreciate everyone listening in. Understand this was probably one of the most technical tonal talks. But we wanted to kind of give the background information on how it came about, what's going on, why does it work, what we're thinking about for future improvement. So certainly appreciate every single person that listened to this. And Zach and I will catch you in the OTC or maybe at the Tonal Training Lab if you're in New York area sometime soon. Thank you so much.
And feel free to leave feedback on the workouts. We read all of it.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.